Okay. Hi everyone. So we are live now, and I'm joined by Professor Ashwini Deshpande in this lecture series or webinar series that Pratham is organizing in the month of March. And every week we have scheduled a discussion with an expert, largely around the topic of, and we've called the stream of conversations that we're having under the title of "What Makes Work for Women," which is largely around women's participation in the labor force. And this the reason why we wanted to have this conversation in the month of March is one, of course, the International Women's Day on the 8th of March. And secondly, Pratham has been working on the issue of, or let's say on the problem of very low female labor force participation rates that India sees right now. I'll quickly introduce you to the audience who have joined us. So allow me 2 minutes for that. So Dr. Ashwini Deshpande is the head of Department of Economics and is the academic director of the Center for Economic Data and Analysis at Ashoka University. In her earlier years in her research, she has focused on in the international debt crisis of the 1980s. But over the years, her research has focused on the economics of discrimination and affirmative action, with a particular focus on caste and gender. And ma'am, would love to hear your insights on these two issues because our team faces these issues on the ground on an everyday basis. And she also has recently received the Scotch Award for Gender Economics. So, ma'am, I don't think we could have had a better expert to speak on the topic for today, which, for everyone's information, is titled "The Ripple Effect: How Women's Workforce Participation Transforms Society." And, ma'am, I'll let you set the tone for this conversation right away. And the first question that I have for you is going to be, how do you define ripple effect of women's participation, keeping in mind maybe the one data point that India's current female labor force participation is 31% as per a World Bank report. This is a 2023 data point against the global average of 49%. So we are clearly behind the global average. So why is that? And when, for example, some studies suggest that gender parity can add another $770 billion to India's GDP in this year or in the next 2 years. Does the ripple effect only include the economic aspect of it? What are the social aspects attached to the ripple effect? So if you could just define what we mean by ripple effect, even though we have said the title for today's discussion, that would be a great, maybe a starting point for all of us.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar series. I'm very pleased to be here. As you know very well, I am working also with Pratham Skilling for a research project. So that makes it especially special for me. And thank you also for the very kind introduction. So on the particular question that you have asked, so just a factual clarification first, which is that India's female labor force participation rate is now at around 38%, not 31. So that's just, a factual clarification. However, having said that, India's female labor force participation rate is lower than countries at comparable income levels. And also that this 38% has been a result of the rise in female labor force participation rate in the last 5 years. So before that, it was actually quite worrying how low the female labor force participation rate was. So you're absolutely right to ask this question and focus on this question, even when we account for the recent rise. So there are several parts to your question. First of all, what is the ripple effect? I assume what you meant by the ripple effect when you said the title for this conversation is that when women enter paid work, all kinds of things begin to change in the world of work and inside the home. So as women step out of the home to go into paid work, the older arrangement that women have to be exclusively responsible for domestic work, for example, there will have to be a little bit of a shift there. It is true that the shift won't be instantaneous. There would be a time when women will be working, as many working women today experience, which is that they work in office or they work at the workplace and then they work at home. So typically when women go back from their paid jobs, their second shift starts. Whereas when men go back from their paid jobs, their period of rest and relaxation starts. So this is the sad truth about India. However, if female labor force participation rate continues to increase and women continue to be involved in larger numbers in paid work, then eventually that can set into motion. I'm not saying it's automatic or that it will necessarily happen, but it can set into motion a series of changes inside the home. For example, it could shift the norm about women being responsible for domestic work. It can also set into motion a series of changes at the workplace. So, for example, male colleagues will be much more attentive to the fact that now they have to deal with female colleagues. There'll be gender parity, hopefully, at various stages of decision making, and so on and so forth. So, there can be multiplicity of effects. Not that each one of these will happen automatically or necessarily, but the ripple effect refers to a series of changes that can cascade because women are now in the paid workforce. But a number of conditions have to be met for this. So, whether it will happen or not, we have to see.
So, ma'am, if you can just maybe also tell us why has this increase from 31% to 38% happened in the last 5 years that you mentioned? Is it something that happened naturally, or are there certain key factors that have enabled this rise? And two, because you were mentioning a lot of things have to go right for this to continue to increase. What are those things that need to go right, let's say in the society or in the economy, for us to move towards or continue the increase in female labor force participation?
Right. So on our website, CEDA, Center for Economic Development and Analysis, Economic Data and Analysis, CEDA, of which I'm the academic director, you'll find a number of articles on this subject. So I encourage listeners to go to our website and check those out. But very briefly, if you look at the increase in the last 5 years, a lot of it in the initial 2-3 years has been in terms of unpaid work on family enterprises. So this is not unpaid domestic work, not about cooking and cleaning and taking care of children, which is a very large part of what women do. But this is about women contributing their labor to enterprises that are the source of livelihood for their families. So these could be farms, these could be kirana shops, these could be some artisanal activity like making good or papad or making carpets or pots or whatever it is. So activities that families do in order to earn a livelihood. Women have always worked on these activities, and when men work on these activities, they are counted as workers. But when women work on these family enterprises, often women themselves are not aware that what they're doing is economic work because they don't get paid. And they don't have a say in the decision making. So they think of it as an extension of their domestic work. So they take, families that own livestock. Women take care of those animals. Families that own cattle, families that do dairy production or poultry, fisheries, livestock. A lot of families in India earn their livelihoods through these activities. Women take care of all the animals and everything, just like they take care of the children and the elderly in the home. But they are not counted as dairy farmers or they are not counted as livestock farmers. So the initial increase was actually just counting more accurately women's work that they were already doing. So it didn't change anything on the ground. It was just kind of better measurement. In the second phase of the increase, there is a clear increase in women describing themselves as self-employed. Now, self-employed, you don't always think of big businesses. So if a woman is, for example, just sitting outside and selling tea all by herself, she's self-employed, means she's not working for an employer. Now, self-employment can be and agriculture is also described as self-employment. So self-employment encompasses a huge range of activities, not all of them being very, giving women a large amount of income or decision-making, et cetera. So it could be, one way to look at this is basically it's distress kind of work. Women are doing whatever work is available. And if that means that they have to just work for themselves and, put together some business that the family works in, so be it. However, there's also an increase in women borrowing for self-employment. So it seems that there is some degree of productive activity also going on, but we'll have to wait for more data to say that. So overall, the picture is not as transformative as we would like it to be. Yes, there's been an increase in female labor force participation rate. And I've just done a piece where I've looked at data indicators from other kinds of data just to make sure that this is not some data kind of data-driven, change in definition kind of a phenomenon, and it isn't. There seems to be some uptick in economic activity by women, and they're reporting that in surveys, but it's not as transformative or not likely to create a ripple effect that we were just talking about a little while ago. For that to happen, they have to be paid jobs, or even if it's self-employment, it has to be remunerative for it to be transformative.
Ma'am, in fact, that was going to be my next question, because I could sense that from how you describe the different occupations that have led to the recent increase, that the ripple effect of an increase in female labor force participation will be different for different kinds of industries. So it might be very different from the primary or sector versus a tertiary sector. So again, given also that there are a lot of macro trends that influence labor force participation in general, do you see either, let's say, a certain sector or maybe some kind of new age jobs, because we're also living in the last 5 years also include the post-COVID years, where a lot of tech came into, like, tech became a big factor in deciding who gets a job and who does not. So, and this trend seems to be continuing. So, apart from the primary sector that you mentioned, the recent, which because of which the recent increases happened, are there other sectors that you can say as a researcher looking more keenly towards, with an expectation that these sectors can provide more jobs or to women? Is there something that on your list, or is it something that can very unpredictable right now?
No, so it's self-employment, not necessarily in the primary sector. Self-employment just means that you're not working for another employer. So even in urban areas, if you set up some small business or provide some, service, that's self-employment. Having said that, in the aggregate, you don't see an increase in the proportion of women working for regular wage and salaried jobs. You don't see that. So the bulk of the increase in female labor force participation rate has come from self-employment. And it's not, the earnings from self-employment have not increased. So proportion of women reporting that they're in self-employment, that has increased, but the earnings of women in self-employment have not increased. So that goes to suggest that, yes, women are finding avenues for work that will give them some income, but it's not yet remunerative enough, or it's not yet large enough, in terms of just transforming the lives of their own lives or the lives of their families. But, people have to live, people have to earn a living. And if both men and women have to work together to get that, then so be it. Now, in terms of urban areas, that's the formal sector jobs you're talking about. That's really 10% maximum of the labor force. 90% of India's labor force is in the informal sector. In the formal sector, 10% of the workforce, there isn't a huge transformation to be seen yet. It is true that in urban areas, women are joining the gig economy, platform economy, working, whether it is a question of working for some things like Urban Company or all of these platforms that have come up. So that give sort of platform-based work, but there aren't good enough estimates of this kind of work, not just for women, even for men. So we really don't have a very good sense from the data what proportion of the workforce is working in this capacity. But in big cities, you do see women, increasingly working, for cloud kitchens or sort of service deliveries of all kinds. Little bit, you also see them in petrol pumps. You see things like Blue Smart taxis that employ a lot of female drivers. You see pink cab services in many cities. So you are seeing some of that, but we don't have national level, we don't have a good enough sense of the numbers here.
So now my next question for you is, and I set some context to the question because recently what we did was we went and collected data from around 1 lakh youth who we had trained over the last 10 years and placed them in different jobs. And we had largely trained them in given them vocational training, which is of a short duration of 2 to 3 months, and then place them in blue collar entry level jobs around the country. And this was in a way a survey to capture what has been the long term effect of the trainings that we have done. And there was a clear gender disparity where we saw that around 72% of the men that we had trained are in some sort of positive outcome after the vocational training that they got, but the comparable number for women was around 50%. So, and the problem that we're also dealing with as an organization is when we try to go for livelihoods, we don't see a big increase in income, which does not lead to the ripple effect that you're talking about. But when we go for the formal sector jobs, we usually do not see a large or long-term retention of women in the labor force because they usually have to drop out, especially when they get married or if they have a child. And the average age of the first mother in India is 21 right now, and most of our trainees are aged between 18 to 24. So they don't retain themselves in jobs for long. So our question for you, ma'am, is: do you have any key design inputs which we as an organization or anybody working to try to solve this problem of getting women into the workforce, if that we can implement or keep in mind while designing our interventions going ahead? So it's a very broad question, but we would love to hear from you as to how we can rethink on this problem, because this is something that we have been thinking on for a long time.
Yeah, so, just to give, thank you for this. It's a very important question, and I don't claim to have the answer, but I'll try to, answer it to the extent I can. So one is, for the listeners, I would like to tell them that the research that we are doing in collaboration with Pratham Skilling is precisely to tell women that they need not always choose the stereotypically feminine activities like, beauty or tailoring or cooking or things like that. If they want to, that's fine. But if you think of the setting in India, these activities, there's a limit to how remunerative they can be, because there's a limit to how many beauty parlors you can have in a given location, or just given income levels of people. The kind of people that will spend on things like beauty, etc., is a very small sliver of the Indian population. So women tend to choose that because they themselves feel that these are more suited for them because they are women, because these are stereotypically considered feminine activities. Also, they somehow feel that maybe their families or their communities might be more willing to let them do these jobs if they chose the stereotypically feminine jobs. What we are finding in our research with Pratham Skilling actually is, first of all, girls and their families, must add, have aspirations that have gone far beyond these stereotypes. Girls are willing to take chances. They are willing to experiment, including things like, very stereotypically male occupations like car mechanics. I would have never imagined that girls would be willing to learn, car repairs and things like that. But even those they are willing to learn. We are actually trying to see in the more intermediate kind of skilling that you provide, which is hospitality and healthcare. And we find that these are sectors that are far more remunerative for women and for men, for that matter, compared to, cooking, tailoring, beauty parlor kind of jobs. And there's far greater demand for this kind of work in the cities, right? And so, but many women are not aware of, what they can earn. Many families are not aware of what they can earn. And there's also a little bit of an apprehension because moving to the city, who's going to take care of you? You lose your networks in the villages, etc., etc. But what I want to highlight today for everybody is that we focus all the time on the constraints that women face from within their families or their communities. These constraints are real. I'm not trying to minimize them. But I think that is a very important second part of the picture, which is just as important, if not more important, are the constraints that women face from the side of employers. Employers still carry those old biases about what work women can do and cannot do, whereas women can actually do much more than what employers think they can do. Secondly, workplaces are not female friendly. So yeah, it's true that women drop out at the time of childbearing, etc. But if workplaces were more female friendly, fewer women would drop out. If employers could find a way of keeping them, many places, conversations with women, both in the context of our project with Pratham Skilling as well as outside, many women say that for the entire building, if they are lucky to work in a building, for the entire building, there'll be one single female toilet on some floor, and they have to go all the way down or all the way up to use that toilet. And, their supervisors or managers will say, oh, not more than 5 minutes. You have to be back at your workplace in 5 minutes, etc. Even women who work in malls have reported that even the simple thing like using a restroom is very, very difficult for them. right? Because they have to go all the way down to the basement because they're not allowed to use the toilets that are meant for the consumers. So how can we make, and that's not something for Pratham Skilling to solve, obviously, I understand that. But I think the larger question is, how do you work on what economists call the demand side of the problem? See, all these questions about skilling, about childcare, about domestic work, these are the supply side, which is that they affect women's ability to supply their labor. But employment is a combination of supply and demand, right? So if women have, even if supposing hypothetically you waved a magic wand and everything got sorted out in the supply side, there's still the demand side. There are still the employers. They have their biases. They have their workplace cultures, you know. Think of the top corporate sector, right? Now, if deals are getting struck and decisions are getting taken on the golf course, or, again, that's not necessarily a segment that Pratham Skilling is dealing with. But since many people are listening to this, I do want to point this out. Supposing that I work in an office and my boss is taking decisions with his male buddies at the golf course, to which I can't go because I have to take care of my children, or over a drink, which is a late night drink. Again, women are less likely to be able to go to these things. So decision making now moves outside the office and nobody sees anything wrong with it because it's like, oh, our buddies, we are all buddies and we are just going to hang out and take decisions. So the notion, and this is the ripple, this links back to the ripple effect. Supposing there were more female officers or managers or supervisors or decision makers, the nature of decision making itself will change. Everybody will realize that you can't just do informal conversations in the men's loo or at the golf course or, at a drink, at a drinks party. You need to take decisions in a more formal way in an office setting at a time that's convenient to everybody, and be more transparent and open about how decisions are taken, right? So this is the ripple effect that can happen if more women to be both in the workplace as well as in decision-making spheres, right? Now, coming back again now to the sector that, the Pratham Skilling kind of, which is the bulk of the labor force, actually, 90%, that's the informal sector. We are not really talking about the large corporate sector necessarily. These are small enterprises with sometimes with just 2-3 people or maybe 10 people, if you are lucky, working in them. They are not in fancy office buildings. They're in some home that's converted to a workplace, etc., etc. There, the issues are even bigger. The constraints are even larger. It's highly likely that a workplace in a home setting may not have any toilet. Forget about a women's toilet. And men can just go out, and go to the street, but women can't, right? So these are all barriers from the demand side. In addition, there could be harassment at the workplace. There could be sexual harassment at the workplace, right? So these are all barriers from the demand side, which a skilling program cannot solve and is not expected to. But I think in our conversation, we get so focused on the supply side problems. Oh, women will have children. Women will get married. Women have to go home and cook. Yeah, all that is true. But employers can do their bit also. They can be more sensitized, right? Now think of a woman who has worked, say 21, you said. Supposing, somebody joined a workplace at 18. She worked till she was 21. Then she got married. She already has 3 years of work experience. Is it better for the employer to fire that woman and look for a new person? Or would it be better for the employer to say, okay, why don't you take 3 months off? We may not pay you or pay you, ideally pay you for 3 months. But if they're don't have deep pockets, maybe not even pay them. But we hold your job for you. You come back after 3 months. Right? You've already trained her for 3 years. And it's cheaper and it's more efficient for the employers to retain women rather than let go of the women that they hired and then try to look for fresh recruits every time. So the CEDA, we just did a report on the returnship road, and I'm happy to, share a copy with you. You can put that in the captions below below the video, where we talk about how getting women back into the workforce, if they took a career break, makes business sense for employers as well. Because these women have some work experience. They have some training. Many of these women are willing to come back to the workforce when their children are a little bit older. Why not target slightly older women as well? Again, I'm not saying all of this is relevant for Pratham skilling as such, but I think these are all different segments of women who have their specific problems, and there is no one size fits all kind of a solution. It depends on either we in the rural areas, urban areas, formal sector, informal sector, fresher women, returnee women, large, organizations with 500 plus employees, small organizations with 5 employees. All of these will have to have different solutions.
Thank you, ma'am. And we look forward to your findings of the research that you're doing with us, because we would love to implement and change our design policy, or in general, to, let's say, talk about the demand and the supplies and look at our work in that manner and visualize our work in that manner. So that's very insightful. One question that I had for you was on the role model effect that women can have, and you can say the other side of the ripple effect that we're talking about. And one instance that I want to share with you from our work is that about a village in Maharashtra near Aurangabad called Vadgaon, where we started off by training 5 or 6 women as an electrician, and who started working in the nearby MIDC. And through the role model effect or the ripple effect, whatever you call it, ultimately more than 40-50 women have ended up being trained as electricians from the same village. So that's a big, massive social shift at a unit level, at a village level. So I want to know, especially given the starting point of our conversation was also the recent increase in FLPR. So how can this role model effect be created? Does it happen naturally, or are there, let's say, certain designs or interventions which can multiply the ripple effect that we have been talking about for the last 20-25 minutes?
Yeah, no, this is a very, very important point. In fact, our work with Pratham Skilling also focuses on role models. So we've got, women who've trained with you and are now successfully running their businesses in hospitality and healthcare. And they've recorded these absolutely beautiful, moving videos for us of their own lives. And when we show it to women in the field, people literally have tears in their eyes, because these are women, girls, just like themselves, but who took the plunge, who decided that they're going to do it and fight all odds, and they've been successful. So I think role models are super, super important. And I'm not surprised, and I'm of course thrilled, but not surprised to see that when a few women took the plunge and decided to become electricians, which is kind of a male domain, many other women followed and, and did that. It is not automatic, but I think role models have a tremendous impact. Think of and that's true of any field. You think of academics. Back in the 50s, the proportion of women doing higher education was small. Proportion of female professors was small. Now you see, more and more, our classrooms have become increasingly, actually, many subjects, women outnumber men. So, proportions of women have increased, and proportions of female professors have increased. So overall, the nature of the academic profession itself has undergone a change. And that has ripple effects, because it tells young women who join as first-year students, they look at their professors or they look at senior researchers and say, oh, this is possible. I can be this person too, and so I think it's a tremendously powerful phenomenon. And this is what is going to lead to the ripple effect. And so that's why I feel that initially, even if it's very few people who make these choices, very few women who make these choices, eventually it opens the door, it paves the way for many, many, many other women to make these choices. You've been speaking to me in English, so I've been responding in English. But because earlier you had asked me to also speak in Hindi, so मैं थोड़ा बहुत हिंदी में भी बताती हूँ. वो ये बात है कि जब हम औरों को देखते हैं, हमारे जो हम करना चाहते हैं दिल से, और हम कर नहीं पाते हैं क्योंकि हमें लगता है समाज इसको मंजूरी नहीं देगा, तो हम भी थोड़े डर जाते हैं कि भैया पता नहीं मैं ऐसा कुछ कदम उठाऊं और समाज में अगर मेरी बुराई हो या मेरे घर वालों की बुराई हो, तो मैं वो नहीं चाहती. लेकिन जब मैं देखूंगी कि और कई लोग ये काम कर रहे हैं, इसी तरह का काम कर रहे हैं, और उनके माता पिता, उनके समाज, उनके कम्युनिटीज के अन्य लोग वो बुरा नहीं मान रहे हैं, तो मुझ में भी हिम्मत बढ़ती है. और हमारा जो प्रथम स्किलिंग के साथ जो काम उत्तर प्रदेश में हो रहा है, उसमें हम यही देखते हैं कि जब हम ये ओपन डेज करते हैं तो लड़कियां उसमें आती हैं. कई लड़कियां माता पिता के साथ आती हैं, कई लड़कियां पड़ोसियों के साथ आती हैं, कई लड़कियां अन्य लड़कियों के साथ आती हैं, और सब लोग ये देखते हैं कि जैसा वो सोचते हैं ऐसा सोचने वाले कई और लोग हैं, और उससे काफी हमें उम्मीद है. अभी हमारी जो स्टडी है वो चल रही है, तो अभी मुझे पूरी तरह से उसके नतीजे नहीं मालूम है, लेकिन हमें उम्मीद ये है कि ये जो रोल मॉडल इफेक्ट है, उससे ये रिपल इफेक्ट जो हम शुरुआत में जो बात कर रहे थे, उससे ये रिपल इफेक्ट पैदा होगा, और हमें उम्मीद है कि थोड़ा बहुत द नीडल विल शिफ्ट in terms of increasing female labor force participation. But let me just end by saying that getting women in the labor force is only the beginning of the journey. It should not be taken to be the end, which is to say that चलिए जी अब female labor force participation rate के आंकड़े अच्छे हो गए, तो चलिए अब हमने सारी समस्या हमने सुलझा ली और बात खत्म। ये बात नहीं है। जो मैंने आपको पहले मिसालें दी, जो वर्क प्लेस कल्चर की बात हुई, या एम्प्लॉयर जो हमारे जो एम्प्लॉयर्स हैं उनकी तरफ से जो बायस होता है, वो सारी जो बातें की, वो समस्याएं तब भी रहेंगी, और उनको फिर सॉल्व करना, दैट इज द नेक्स्ट सेट ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स टू सॉल्व।
मैम, मेरा आखिरी सवाल है आपके लिए,
जी।
एंड दिस क्वेश्चन इज कि हाउ डू यू कंपेयर इंडिया, बिकॉज माय थिंकिंग इज ऐसा नहीं कि इंडिया इज द ओनली कंट्री दैट इज मूविंग फ्रॉम अ लार्जली पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी टू लेट्स से सोसाइटी जहाँ पे विमेन का पार्टिसिपेशन वर्कफोर्स में ज्यादा है, और बाकी कंट्रीज में भी ये ट्रांजिशन या तो हो गया है या चल रहा है। इवन दो इंडिया को कंपेयर करना बहुत मुश्किल है, देयर आर वेरी फ्यू कंपेरेबल कंट्रीज, बट व्हाट ऐसे कुछ एग्जांपल्स हैं क्या जहाँ पे एक सिमिलर कंट्री जो काफी पेट्रियार्कल है, बिकॉज मोस्ट सोसाइटीज हैव बीन पेट्रियार्कल, इनफैक्ट अ कपल ऑफ मेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटीज इंडिया में भी थे बट दे हैव लार्जली डाइड डाउन। तो ऐसा कोई ट्रेडिशनली पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी दैट शिफ्टेड टुवर्ड्स an economy at least जहाँ पे women were actively participating, had a voice in the economy as well, and वो उसका effect अभी उसका positive effect जो ripple effect है हमें दिख रहा है। तो is there any example that you think is relevant for India, या फिर this is a very unique example and might like so I just want to hear your thoughts on
नहीं,
this.
ये बहुत अच्छा सवाल आपने पूछा, लेकिन एक बात मैं सबको बता दूं, ये कि दुनिया में कोई ऐसा देश नहीं है जो कि पेट्रियार्कल नहीं है। पितृसत्ता जो है ये सारे देशों में, चाहे आप अमेरिका देख लीजिए, चाहे स्कैंडिनेविया देख लीजिए, स्कैंडिनेवियन जो देश है मतलब स्वीडन, नॉर्वे वगैरह, डेनमार्क वगैरह, ये 3-4 देश, फिनलैंड, ये 4 देश माने जाते हैं कि जहाँ सबसे ज्यादा जेंडर इक्वालिटी है। लेकिन उन देशों में भी पूरी तरह इक्वालिटी नहीं है। तो जब उन देशों में ही नहीं हो पाई तो औरों की तो आप क्या बात करेंगे। अभी आप अमेरिका का अगर हाल देखेंगे तो वहां तो खैर दूसरा ही हाल है। जो गेन्स वहां की औरतों ने कई सालों से लड़कर हासिल किए हैं, वो सारे गेन्स अब वापस जो है वो पुरानी पेट्रियार्कल नॉर्म्स की तरफ जाने की का डर ऑलरेडी है। कुछ कुछ तो कुछ उनके हक छीन लिए गए हैं, और कुछ आगे भी छीनेंगे ऐसा लग रहा है। तो ये सारी चीजें जो है ये ऊपर नीचे हैं, चलती रहेंगी। मेन सवाल ये है कि हम आगे बढ़ रहे हैं कि नहीं बढ़ रहे हैं। That is the main question to ask. And I think here we need to enlarge the conversation a little bit beyond labor force participation rates. See, women are intelligent, autonomous, decision-making humans just as men are. And they have to be treated as such in all aspects of their life. You can't say, अच्छा आप लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन रेट बढ़ाओ क्योंकि हमें जीडीपी बढ़ाना है, लेकिन आप शादी किससे करोगे ये मैं आपको बताऊंगा, आप क्या कपड़े पहनोगे ये मैं आपको बताऊंगा, आप खाना क्या खाओगे ये मैं आपको बताऊंगा। ऐसे तो नहीं हो सकता ना कि आप हमें अपनी मजदूरी दीजिए, हम जीडीपी बढ़ा देंगे अपना, उसके बाद आप जो जैसा हम कहते हैं वैसा करिए, है ना। तो अगर हमको पेट्रियार्कल नॉर्म्स को वीकन करना है, वो सब सब सारे एंगल्स में वीकन करना पड़ेगा। इसीलिए ये सवाल सिर्फ महिलाओं का इकोनॉमी में पार्टिसिपेट करना, ये बहुत बड़ा सवाल है और ये बहुत जरूरी है, लेकिन सिर्फ वहां तक ये सीमित नहीं रह सकता। हमें ओवरऑल अगर पेट्रियार्की को वो करना है, थोड़ा सा उसको कम स्ट्रिंजेंट बनाना है, तो हमें कई और डिमेंशंस में जो है चेंजेस देखने पड़ेंगे, जो कि हिंदुस्तान में हो रहे हैं। हिंदुस्तानी औरतें बहुत ज्यादा क्या कहना चाहिए, बहादुर हैं और अपने हक जानती हैं, और जगह जगह वो दिखाती भी हैं। तो बहुत बढ़िया बात है मेरी 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 नजर से देखा जाए तो लेकिन कोई ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट कंट्री का कोई एग्जाम्पल नहीं है। कोई सब जगह शेड्स ऑफ ग्रे है। एक कंट्री का एग्जाम्पल जो मैं थोड़ा बहुत सोच सकती हूँ वो है बांग्लादेश, जिनका कि 3% लेबर फोर्स, फीमेल लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन रेट था 20 साल पहले, और अब 36 पे चला गया है। तो ये बहुत बड़ा फर्क है, लेकिन वहां भी बहुत चैलेंजेस है। जो रेडीमेड गारमेंट सेक्टर है जहाँ पे महिलाओं ने जाके फैक्ट्री में काम करना शुरू किया, वहां पे ये भी खबर है कि फैक्ट्री के अंदर हरासमेंट या अनसेफ वर्किंग कंडीशंस और वो सब भी है। तो हालांकि फीमेल लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन रेट तो बढ़ा, लेकिन इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि वो नौकरियां बहुत बढ़िया किस्म की नौकरियां थी वगैरह वगैरह। सो व्हाट आई एम ट्राइंग टू पॉइंट आउट इज दैट ये पूरा जो सवाल है वो बहुत जटिल है, बहुत मुश्किल है, इसके कई सारे पहलू हैं। और अगर एक पहलू में हम इम्प्रूवमेंट देख भी लेते हैं, तो जब तक बाकी पहलुओं में इम्प्रूवमेंट नहीं होता है, तब तक ये सवाल बरकरार रहेगा। ठीक है ना? तो ये हमें पूरे उसका जो पूरा टोटलिटी है, उसकी जो पूरी जो उसकी संपूर्णता है, उसमें हमें ये देखना पड़ेगा।
Right. I think, ma'am, that's a very good way to answer. They take one audience question जो chat में आया है, and the question is very similar on the lines जो आपके we have to go beyond just looking at labor force participation. And the question is, I'll just read it out for the audience. How does women's employment contribute to shifting caregiving roles and men's participation at home? So, ma'am, you can like take the question in any way you want, and yeah.
No, thank you, whoever has asked this question. In fact, that's one point that I wanted to make, and we got talking about other things, which is think of now the caregiving role. The fact is that children are born, they have to be nurtured. Humans take 18 years to become adults. Certain other animal species, within 2 or 3 days, animals just start doing their thing. But in human beings, there are 18 years conventionally we accept for them to be nurtured. People get old, they have to be looked after. So those who are between, say, 15 roughly to about 65, you can call them, I mean, 18 is legally adult, but from 15 onwards, you can pretty much say that people start becoming self-sufficient. But there are people who are below 15 years of age or below 18 years of age, and there are people who are above 65 years of age, and they both have to be cared for. This is what society needs. This is what families need. Then, if this is what societies need and this is what families need, why must it only be a woman's job? ऐसा कहाँ लिखा हुआ है कि ये सारे काम सिर्फ महिलाएं ही कर सकती हैं? तो केयर गिविंग को हमें एक 3 R's फ्रेमवर्क कहते हैं इस पूरे लिटरेचर में। आर, द लेटर आर, अंग्रेजी का अल्फाबेट आर, 3 R's हैं इसमें: रिकॉग्नाइज, रिड्यूस, रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूट। पहली बात तो ये पहचानिए कि ये सारा काम कोई ना कोई कर रहा है, जो कि एक औरत है। अगर आपने ये मूवी अभी जो हाल ही में हिंदी मूवी आई है, मिसेस नाम की एक मूवी है, पता नहीं आप लोगों ने कितने लोगों ने देखी है, लेकिन नहीं देखी तो जरूर देखिए। और जो ओरिजिनल मलयालम इसकी फिल्म बनी थी, द ग्रेट इंडियन किचन, वो सबटाइटल्स के साथ जो लोग पढ़ सकते हैं वो जरूर पढ़िएगा, देखिएगा। लेकिन हिंदी में अवेलेबल है, मिसेस सानिया मल्होत्रा ने उसमें काम किया है। वो जो औरत घर में पूरे वक्त खाना बनाती रहती है, किसी को पता ही नहीं चलता है कि वो कुछ काम कर रही है। वो कहते क्यों थक गई हो तुम, किस बात की कंप्लेंट है तुम्हें, क्या किया तुमने आज? कुछ भी तो नहीं किया, क्योंकि वो जो सारा काम कर रही है वो इनविजिबल है, अदृश्य है। तो पहला काम है में 3 R's में पहला आर क्या है? रिकॉग्नाइज। दूसरा आर क्या है? रिड्यूस। ये काम चाहे वो औरत करे चाहे वो मर्द करे, औरत ही करती है। हिंदुस्तान की औरतें 10 गुना ज्यादा काम करती हैं मर्दों से। और ये जो इनइक्वालिटी है, ये जो असमानता है, ये दुनिया भर में सबसे सबसे ज्यादा है। और जगहों पे औरतें 3 गुना 2 गुना ऐसे काम करती हैं, हिंदुस्तान में औरतें 10 गुना ज्यादा काम करती हैं। ये सारे जो काम है। तो पहला आर है रिकॉग्नाइज, पहचानिए कि औरतें ये काम कर रही हैं, ये जादू की छड़ी कोई नहीं घुमा रहा है, अपने आप नहीं हो रहा है ये काम। दूसरी बात है रिड्यूस, कम कीजिए इस काम को। कैसे कम करेंगे? अगर आपके पास मीन्स हैं तो आप लेबर सेविंग डिवाइसेस खरीदिए, अगर आप उतना कमा पाते हैं तो। अगर नहीं कमा पाते तो मदद कीजिए। घर के हर व्यक्ति का यह काम है, बड़ों का, बच्चों का, जिसको जितना हो सके सब करना है। और तीसरा, रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूट। हो सकता है कि बहुत गरीब परिवारों में औरतें भी बाहर काम करती हैं, मर्द भी बाहर काम करते हैं और बहुत मुश्किल हालात में काम करते हैं, तो उनके पास हो सकता है कि संभव नहीं है कि वो घर में बैठ के, उनके पास लग्जरी नहीं है कि घर में बैठ के ये सब करें। तो वहां पे रोल आता है कि दिस हैज टू बी मूव्ड आउट ऑफ द फैमिली एंड इनटू द डोमेन ऑफ द सोसाइटी। दिस इज कॉल्ड, अंग्रेजी में इसको कहते हैं केयर इकोनॉमी। तो मान लीजिए आप आंगनबाड़ी सेंटर देख लीजिए, ये एक एग्जाम्पल है केयर इकोनॉमी का, जिसमें बच्चों को आप वहां भेज सकते हैं ताकि घर में उतने टाइम के लिए आपको बच्चों को नहीं देखना पड़ेगा। ठीक है ना? यही एल्डरली केयर पे भी आप लगा सकते हैं। यही आप खाना, मान लीजिए आप हर घर के पास, हर फैक्ट्री के पास मान लीजिए बहुत घर का जैसे सिंपल खाना बनाने वाला कुछ कैंटीन बन जाए मान लो, बल्कि इस तरह के कुछ कुछ कैंटीन कुछ जगह पे, जैसे अम्माज कैंटीन है तमिलनाडु में, महाराष्ट्र में भी है, घर के जैसा खाना देते हैं वो सस्ते दामों पर, तो घर में खाना नहीं बनाना पड़ेगा। तो ऐसी कौन से घर के काम हैं जो कि हम आउटसोर्स कर सकते हैं, not through expensive private care, but through either publicly provided और public private partnership करके, तो उसको घर से बाहर निकाल के अगर आप केयर इकोनॉमी में डालेंगे, उससे नौकरियां भी अवेलेबल होंगी, लोगों के लिए काम भी मिलेगा, जिसमें औरतें भी काम कर सकती हैं, मर्द भी काम कर सकते हैं। इट विल क्रिएट जॉब्स, दीज आर ग्रीन जॉब्स, दीज आर लेबर इंटेंसिव जॉब्स। तो कई सारी समस्याएं एक साथ सॉल्व हो जाएंगी अगर आप केयर इकोनॉमी में इन्वेस्टमेंट करें। So yeah, thank you for this question, because this is what I wanted to talk about, and you gave me an opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. This brings us to an end of all the questions that we had. Not that we're out of questions, but we're out of time. So thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us this time. Personally, मेरे लिए बहुत अच्छा experience is listening to you one-on-one, understanding your thoughts. But I'm sure this is a great, these are great insights for us as an organization, and I'm sure the audience members who have joined us from outside Pratham. So like I'll just thank you again. That's all I can do for your insights, and we love working with you, and we look forward to whatever insights you keep giving us. And for the audience, thank you so much. The question was great, and I hope all of you also had a good time. And we have the next part of the conversation, webinar conversations that we're having on the 24th, and the details of which will be out on our social media pages. So please go and follow us and subscribe to the next webinar. We look forward to bringing more such conversations that can create a more informed, let's say, people or a more informed ecosystem in the development sector. And with that, hope I maybe end this call, and thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the